Okay, good afternoon, year two. I've just thought I'd recorded this video, so I've just realized I didn't press record, so it's not been saved. So if it's a little bit rushed, I apologize. I'm just trying to keep time going. So today, though, we're going to be learning about Florence Nightingale. Now, the last couple of weeks, we've been learning about nurses and about hospitals, and we've learned about how hospitals change and how nurses have a big role in that. And we've learned about significant people. Now, we know that there's lots of significant people, but Florence Nightingale is one of these very, very significant people. Okay, and we're going to learn about her life. So your activity today is going to be about doing a timeline, which is a line of events. So I'm going to show you a timeline here. And you can see this timeline is literally a line, and it goes from the beginning here all the way to the end, okay? And we do timelines all the time. We might not realize it. We do them in stories. So when we're sequencing stories, we think about what happens at the beginning, then we think about what happens next, and we work our way up through the events all the way till we get to the end. So a timeline is a way of showing historical information in an order, okay? And it's very important for helping to understand when things happened. So we're going to be looking at this timeline of Florence Nightingale's life. And I'm going to read you out some information about each point. Okay, so we can see, look at the timeline we've got here. When does it begin? What's the first date on that timeline? That's right, it's 1820. What's the last date? 1910. So we can see that this timeline of Florence Nightingale's life runs from 1820 to 1910. So I know there's some fantastic mathematicians out there, year two. Can any of you tell me then, what's the difference between 1820 and 1910? Okay, if you're stuck, think about the difference between 20 and 110. So if it was 1820 to 1920, that would be 100 years. But it's not, is it? It's 10 less than that. So what's 10 less than 100? 90. So this timeline goes on for 90 years. So what might be significant about 90 then? What might it tell us about Florence Nightingale? Have a think. It might tell us that that's how long Florence Nightingale lived for. But it doesn't necessarily. So let's have a look. So our first date we're going to look at for our Florence Nightingale timeline is 1820. And Florence Nightingale was born on the 12th of May in 1820. So she was born in 1820. Then, can you see the timeline? It doesn't just go down. It goes one down, one up, one down, one up, one down, all the way across to the end. So the next one isn't this one. It's this one, because you can see on the line that 1837 is before that one, isn't it? So in 1837, Florence felt God call her to serve him, and she campaigned for better care in hospitals. So she wasn't a nurse at this point, but she'd been called by God. Just like we do, we are given talents and God asks us to do things. She felt like her job was to make hospitals better. At this point, she couldn't be a nurse because there was no such thing as nurses. There was only doctors. And there would have been some helpers, but not many of them. So Florence wanted to make things better. So she did lots of campaigning, talking to people in hospitals, talking to the government to try and change things. Then in 1851, when she was 31, Florence finally became a nurse. So she was able to change things enough so that they accepted people for being nurses. Now, she might not have been paid to do this job because it was still very early in nursing, wasn't it? Then in 1853, Florence was made the superintendent at a medical centre for women in London. So she took care of sick women in London. And she did this as a superintendent. That's like someone who oversees everything, like kind of the boss of the place. So she was quite high up. She'd done very well. Then later on in 1853, the Crimean War broke out. Now, the Crimean War was a war between lots of countries, but England and Russia were two of them. And it took place in a region known as the Crimea, which is kind of Eastern Europe, near where Ukraine is and near where Russia is, but quite close to Turkey as well. So the Crimean War broke out. In 1854, Florence decided to go to Turkey to care for soldiers who were wounded in the war. So back then they did have guns, but guns would have been even more dangerous than they are now. And they also had swords and cannons and things like that that would have caused a lot of injuries to soldiers. So these hospitals would have been full of very, very, very poorly and very sore people. So Florence went there to take care of the soldiers. So she traveled the journey there, which would have been very expensive, and it wasn't paid for her. She would have had to save the money herself to go and work in one of the hospitals that took care of the injured soldiers. Then later on in 1854, still in the same year, Florence, as part of the nursing team, decided that these hospitals she was working in were disgusting. They were dirty. They had rats. The food was horrible. The people didn't have clean clothes or clean bedding. And she decided that the best thing she could do would be to clean up the hospitals. So she got her team together. They mopped the floors. They chased out the rats. They cleaned all the bedding. They helped to make sure that people were cooked decent meals. And it saved lots and lots of lives. People didn't die as much because they weren't getting infections from dirt. They weren't all huddled together and diseases were spreading really quickly. So they could get better much more quickly. Then again in 1854, Florence began to be known by the soldiers in the hospital as the Lady of the Lamp. And that's a nickname we know what Florence Nightingale has now. And this is because she cared for people through the night, holding a lamp in her hand. And she would go and visit the soldiers, make sure that they were comfortable, and she could catch any illnesses or anything that needed treated immediately before waiting for the morning, which is what used to happen with the doctors because they couldn't be everywhere and they needed to have rest as well. So people often got ill in the night. Then in 1855, lots of people, including lots of the soldiers she treated that got better and went home, gave lots of money to something called the Nightingale Fund, which was set up for Florence Nightingale to help train nurses. So nurses weren't trained then. They were taught how to do their job by other nurses a little bit, but they had to kind of go in and just do what they were told. But Florence wanted nurses to be trained. And if any of you have got mums or dads or aunties or uncles or grandmas or granddads who are nurses, you'll know that they have to go to college and university for a very long time to do their job. So now all those college courses and university courses are there, partly because of Florence Nightingale. Then in 1856, the Crimean War, which started in 1853, 3 years before, finally ended. So Florence wasn't needed in the hospitals anymore because there wasn't any more soldiers getting injured. And in 1857, she returned home to England from Turkey as a hero. Everyone loved her. A bit like how our nation sees Sir Captain Tom Moore as a hero. And sadly, he's passed away this week, hasn't he? But he was a hero for all he did for the NHS. And Florence was seen as a hero for all she did for hospitals and the soldiers. Then in 1859, using partly the fund that was set up, and partly because Florence Nightingale had written lots and lots of letters to places and the government to ask for help, the Nightingale Training School was opened. And this was a hospital called St. Thomas's Hospital that literally trained nurses. So all the nurses would be there and they would be trained in their job to make sure they could provide the best care they possibly could. Then a few years later, in 1883, Queen Victoria, who was the Queen at the time, awarded Florence Nightingale the Royal Red Cross, which is a medal that's often given to soldiers for their bravery. And she was given it for her bravery and her care in treating all the injured soldiers. Then, in 1896, sadly, Florence started to become ill, so she couldn't leave her bed. Now, she was quite old at this point. She was born in 1820. And it was now 1896. So she was 76 years old. And that might not sound very old now, but back then, over 100 years ago, people didn't live that long. So that was a good age. And then finally, In 1910, when she was 90 years old, Florence sadly died on the 13th of August. So Florence had a very significant and important life. Now, your task today is going to be using the information in this lesson. You can rewind it and look at it again if you need to. You're going to look at the dates and the events that you've got on your piece of paper, and you are either going to cut them out or rewrite them and put them in the right order on your timeline. Now, just to remind you, timelines go from either top to bottom, or bottom to top. So you'll find on your timeline that I've numbered each box to help you to know what order they go in. So when you're comparing dates, it can be quite tricky. So what I would recommend is, first of all, look at the number at the beginning. If it's an 18, it needs to go near the start of the number line. If it's a 19, it's probably going to be at the end. Then after that, if you're comparing two numbers that have got 18 in them, you need to look at the next two numbers. So if I've got 1820 and 1851, I know that 18 and 18 are the same, so I can ignore those. So I'm just looking at 20 and 51. So what's smaller, 20 or 51? 20. So that would come first, okay? And that's how you are going to do this. Then if you finish early or you want some extra work, I've set you an extension task, which is you're going to write some questions you would like to ask Florence Nightingale to find out some more information about her life. Okay, so you're going to be asking, if you're asking questions, don't forget your question words: who, what, where, when, why, can, did, will, should, could. Okay, and don't forget your question mark at the end. And you can write as many questions as you want as if you're interviewing Florence Nightingale. And if you want to, you could try and find out the answers for yourself using the internet or using books or TV shows. So that's all for today, year two. After half term, we're going to look a little bit more detail at Florence Nightingale, and we're going to be thinking about why she's so significant. Okay. I hope you enjoy doing your timelines, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.